Today I want to talk to you a little bit about going from 3D design to 3D printing. With 3D design, with TinkerCAD or another CAD type of tool, you really can create anything that you can imagine in 3D on your computer. If you look right here, what I made is kind of a silly little, you could call it a person or a robot, just really simple using a box, cylinder, pyramid, and ball. I created this in 3D. It looks pretty cool, at least I think it does. But do you think we will run into problems when we try to 3D print? This is something that I think is really hard to understand because it's a concept that, well, you look at it on your computer and it looks good, so that must mean it's going to be great to print. Even if you have a project that looks exactly the way you want it to, like this piece, it doesn't necessarily mean it is going to print well. The thing that you need to think about as you design something that you want to use 3D printing to make, you need to think about how the printer actually creates your project. If you imagine that you had a hot glue gun in your hand and you are squirting hot glue onto a tray or a sheet of paper or something, and you want to make a sculpture out of it. Or maybe even if you had like a tube of icing and you wanted to make a really cool cupcake design. When you do these things, you always need to make sure that you're building upon something that you already made. So if you're squirting icing onto a cupcake, that's because you are adding a layer and then maybe it gets smaller and smaller, or an ice cream cone, it kind of swirls up into a point at the top. This is because you need something below. If there's nothing below, it's just going to fall down. So something that we run into issues with a lot when we're 3D printing is, say these arms were extremely long. And I mean like really long. And maybe they were angled up a bit more. That actually might help us. So if this arm's long, but it's angled, then the filament, as the printer goes deep, 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 and prints layers of plastic to build these shapes that our computer has told it to do because of what we've created in 3D, it is able to build these layers. But as it gets out to like this point of the arm, there's nothing below the arm to support it. And it's really likely that all of those things that we've tried to build and make aren't going to work because they're just going to fall to the platform. There's not going to be any plastic below to support it there. Now there are ways when you 3D print to fix this. You can print with a support or a brim. So the printer might print a thin layer of plastic to hold this arm up that you can easily break off. And that usually works for a lot of things. But it's just something to keep in mind. When you 3D print, you need to be very conscious of the fact that what you're making needs support below it. And a sphere is a really, really great example of this. Because if you're working with a circle, you run into tons of issues. Because this circle doesn't really have a bottom, right? It has the rounded edge, but balls roll. So as soon as this plastic starts to get hard, it's going to roll off the work plane. Well, the 3D printer thinks that it's still below the head, so it's going to keep trying to build plastic. And that's why sometimes you see just spirals and spirals of plastic all over the place, because the printer was not able to create what you were imagining, or what you even were able to create in CAD. So this is kind of a quick video to get into something that's a little bit complex, but I just really want you to think about that as you think about designing things in 3D. Make sure you're designing things that you will be able to print. And there's still ways to use 3D printing with spheres. You just have to be creative with it. Like maybe instead of using a sphere, we would use a half sphere. And we could print two of them and then glue them together. And then add them to our figure. I hope that was helpful. Please keep this in mind.